April 8, 1945. The morning light over Pearl Harbor burns pale against the mist. Commander Edmund B. Taylor climbs aboard a U.S. Navy seaplane bound for Okinawa. He carries no weapons, only cameras, measuring instruments, and authorization from Admiral Nimitz himself. His assignment: to examine something no American has ever seen: the wreck of the Yamato. Yesterday, nearly 400 American aircraft descended upon Japan's largest battleship in waves that blackened the sky. By sunset, the Yamato was gone, a 72,000-ton fortress torn apart by 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs. 2,498 sailors had gone with her. For months, U.S. intelligence had described the ship as unsinkable, a floating fortress of steel and armor so thick that no weapon in the Pacific was believed capable of piercing it. But Yamato hadn't just sunk, she'd gone down quickly, catastrophically. Now Taylor was being sent to find out why. From the air, Okinawa's waters are deceptively calm, but below, 1,100 feet beneath the waves, lies what was once the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, a ship that was never meant to die this way. As Taylor's plane hums over the ocean, he studies the damage reports sent from the carriers. They make no sense. The Yamato had taken most hits on her port side before rolling over and exploding. But with 1,147 watertight compartments and a torpedo defense system extending more than 5 meters thick, that kind of flooding should have been impossible. Something had failed, something deep within the ship's structure, a flaw no one had seen, or perhaps no one had dared to question. When divers finally reached the wreck months later, they found a shattered giant. Her hull ripped open along the armor belt, massive cracks spiderwebbed across steel plates once thought indestructible. Taylor's mission was simple on paper: determine how the most heavily armored warship in human history, a ship built to withstand 20 torpedoes, was destroyed by 19. But what he was about to uncover would change naval engineering forever. Because the Yamato didn't sink from weakness. She sank because perfection failed her. A single hidden flaw, 30 centimeters wide, turned the pinnacle of Japanese engineering into a steel coffin. In the 1930s, Japan faced a problem no weapon could solve with firepower alone: mathematics. The Washington Naval Treaty, signed after the First World War, had locked Japan into permanent inferiority. For every 3 battleships America could build, Japan was allowed 2. When the treaty expired in 1936, the restrictions vanished, but the imbalance did not. The United States possessed almost limitless steel, shipyards that stretched across 2 oceans, and a workforce that never seemed to tire. Japan, by contrast, had islands and ambition. Chief Naval Constructor Kiichiro Fukuda understood what the Admiralty refused to say out loud: Japan could never win by building more ships. So he proposed something far more audacious: build fewer ships, but make each one so powerful it could fight 2 or even 3 American battleships at once. It was a gamble against arithmetic. In November 1937, inside the sealed design rooms of the Kure Naval Arsenal, Fukuda stood before a scale model of Project No. 1 battleship. 20 officers surrounded him, the only men in Japan allowed to know what they were building. Outside that room, it didn't exist. The design called for 18.1-inch guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship. Each shell would weigh more than a small car, capable of punching through armor no American ship could survive. To carry such weapons, the ship would have to be enormous: 72,000 tons when fully loaded, half again as heavy as anything afloat. Fukuda's blueprints read less like a design and more like a declaration of defiance. A 410mm thick armor belt forged from a secret Japanese alloy called VH steel, developed from captured British formulas. Engines powerful enough to move the giant at 27 knots. A hull divided into more than 1,000 watertight compartments. And deep below, a torpedo protection system so advanced it bordered on fantasy, a labyrinth of bulkheads, voids, and oil tanks meant to absorb any blast. The philosophy was simple. If Japan couldn't outnumber the Americans, it would out-engineer them. Each Yamato-class ship would be less a vessel and more a floating fortress, a machine built not to win a war, but to resist extinction itself. But in that same philosophy, a seed of failure had already been planted. Because when a design demands perfection, even a single deviation, a single missed measurement, can turn genius into disaster. And on a cold morning in 1939, deep inside the shipyard at Kure, one such deviation was about to be made. Construction began in November 1937 under a veil of secrecy so complete that even many senior officers didn't know what was being built in Dry Dock No. 1 at Kure. Workers signed oaths swearing silence under penalty of death. A new entrance was created to isolate those working on the special ship, and guards patrolled the perimeter night and day. The ship would consume more steel than any in Japanese history. Every plate, every rivet, every bolt had to be forged, heated, and shaped precisely to Fukuda's design. Even the cranes had to be redesigned. Old ones simply couldn't lift armor plates that weighed more than 90 tons each. The heart of Yamato's invincibility lay beneath her waterline. There, Japanese engineers created an underwater citadel, a multi-layered torpedo defense system unlike anything before or since. It began with an outer skin of 60mm steel designed to rupture, absorbing the initial shock. Behind it sat a void chamber, then a row of oil tanks. Oil, being liquid, would blunt the blast and soak up energy. Behind that, another void, then two more armor bulkheads, the last one nearly 8 inches thick. 5 layers, 5 chances to stop the sea. Engineers calculated that even a 400-kilogram torpedo warhead would exhaust itself long before it could reach the ship's heart. Mathematically, the Yamato was indestructible, but mathematics does not bend steel. Installing that armor was an act of choreography and chaos. Workers balanced on scaffolding above the curve of the unfinished hull, driving glowing rivets through plates the size of train cars. Precision meant survival. Any misalignment, any air gap, could turn the armor into a funnel for pressure waves. By May 1939, attention turned to the ship's most delicate point, the line where the upper and lower armor belts met, roughly at the waterline. It was a small detail, but one that carried enormous importance. Above that line, the armor defended against shells. Below, it held back the sea. To join them was to join two worlds, one of air, one of pressure. Fukuda's plans called for a step joint, overlapping plates backed by thick internal supports known as backing plates. These were to distribute stress evenly across the seam so that no one area bore the strain. The instructions were clear. Class A inspection required, absolute verification of weld integrity. But inside that shipyard, under crushing schedules and fear of delay, absolute was starting to mean something else. A veteran master shipwright named Takashi Yamamoto, 58 years old and respected by all, oversaw the installation. He'd built warships for 35 years. When he saw that the massive plates wouldn't align perfectly, he made a decision. A field adjustment that would make his job easier, his deadline possible, and his conscience quiet. He ordered the backing plate shortened by 30 centimeters. It was a decision no one questioned. The seam looked flawless from the outside. The rivets were straight. The armor was flush. Inspection teams measured what they could see and found perfection. But hidden behind those plates, where no inspector could ever look again, a gap now existed, a gap that would one day swallow a battleship. When Yamato finally slid into the water on August 8, 1940, her creators watched in awe. She was the most powerful warship ever built, a mountain of steel wrapped in pride, secrecy, and faith in her own invulnerability. They didn't know it yet, but the flaw that would destroy her was already welded into place. By the autumn of 1940, the Yamato was more than a ship. She was a message. To her builders, she proved that Japan's engineers could rival anyone in the world. To her admirals, she was proof that faith in steel could overcome a lack of oil, manpower, or aircraft. And to her enemies, though they didn't yet know it, she would be the last battleship of her kind. When Yamato began sea trials in October 1941, everything visible worked flawlessly. Her engines generated over 150,000 horsepower, pushing the 72,000-ton giant to a surprising 27.5 knots. Her 18.1-inch guns, the largest ever put to sea, hurled shells the size of cars over 25 miles. To the crew who walked her decks for the first time, it felt like stepping aboard a floating empire. Beneath that confidence, below the armor belt, rested the secret weapon that defined Yamato's legend, the torpedo defense system. It was, by every measure, the most sophisticated underwater protection scheme ever attempted. Japanese engineers had tested it endlessly, building small-scale mock-ups and detonating explosives beside them. The data always came back the same. Each layer reduced explosive pressure in precise stages. The oil-filled chambers absorbed shock, the voids vented expanding gases, and the thick internal bulkheads trapped flooding before it could spread. In theory, it worked so perfectly that even multiple hits in the same area would not doom the ship. And so, no full-scale test was ever performed. No one would dare. To fire a torpedo at a battleship that had taken years to build under a veil of national secrecy would have been unthinkable. The Yamato's invincibility remained a calculation, not a certainty. Her creators didn't know that the joint between the upper and lower armor belts, the narrow line of steel meant to hold the two worlds together, contained that 30-centimeter gap where stress could not flow freely, a place where hardened VH armor, superb at deflecting shells, would instead shatter like glass if forced to flex. In metallurgy, there is a delicate balance between hardness and toughness. Hard steel can deflect a bullet, but bend it slightly, and it cracks. Fukuda knew this tension well. His design had specified special annealing at the junction to reduce brittleness and extra reinforcement behind the plates. But the perfection of that process assumed perfect construction. Perfection never truly survives the shipyard. Still, when the Yamato was officially commissioned into the combined fleet on December 16, 1941, just 9 days after Pearl Harbor, none of that mattered. She was a national symbol. To the Japanese people, she embodied destiny, the idea that spirit and craftsmanship could triumph against overwhelming odds. To her crew, she was a fortress they believed could never die. But even the most beautiful armor can only protect what it understands. Yamato's defenses were designed for a war that no longer existed, a war of gunnery duels, not aircraft. The skies would soon rewrite the rules of the sea. And when they did, the Yamato's flawless engineering would meet a new kind of weapon, one that would strike exactly where her perfection ended. In the spring of 1939, as sparks lit the cavernous dry dock at Kure, master shipwright Takashi Yamamoto made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was 58 years old, a quiet man who had built warships since before the Great War. To his workers, he was a legend, the kind of craftsman who could tell if a rivet was set too tight just by the sound of the hammer. He didn't cut corners, he didn't take shortcuts. But in that dry dock, facing deadlines that felt like orders from the emperor himself, he did both. When the time came to install the backing plates that joined the upper and lower armor belts, the curvature of the hull fought against the steel. The massive plates refused to fit. Every adjustment threatened to stall construction for weeks. The engineers above him wanted progress, not perfection. So Yamamoto made a choice that felt small, rational even. He shortened the plates by 30 centimeters, a hand's length, a sliver of metal on a ship that weighed 72,000 tons. He recorded the change in his personal notes, but didn't report it. Reporting it would have invited delays, questions, maybe blame. And when the plates went in, everything looked perfect. The armor flush, the rivets aligned, the welds immaculate. The inspection team arrived days later, clipboards in hand. They measured every visible joint, tapped the steel with hammers, and checked for gaps. The sound rang true. Perfect, they said. And they were right, from the outside. The missing 30 centimeters lay hidden behind that flawless surface, an invisible fracture in the logic of invincibility. The gap meant that stress from the armor above and pressure from the hull below no longer met cleanly. Instead, it concentrated at a thin, unsupported edge. Under constant vibration and wave flexing, that edge would become brittle, microscopic cracks slowly crawling along rivet lines no one could see. Then, when the day came, those cracks would spread faster than light through glass. Yamamoto never spoke of it again. Yamato was launched in August 1940 to the cheers of thousands. From the docks, her silver-gray hull gleamed like a mountain. Flags waved, bands played, children shouted her name. No one could have imagined that buried beneath all that armor was a mistake no human eye could ever find again. When she entered service a year later, Yamato became the pride of the combined fleet. To the Japanese public, she was untouchable. To the men who built her, she was perfection realized. To Yamamoto, she was a secret wrapped in guilt. In his diary that winter, he wrote only one line about her. "The work is finished. I hope she holds." It would take 6 years and nearly 3,000 lives to discover that she would not. When Yamato finally joined the combined fleet in late 1941, the war she had been built for no longer existed. Her colossal guns, each capable of firing a 3,200-pound shell nearly 26 miles, were designed for a single purpose: to face American battleships in a decisive gun duel somewhere in the Pacific. But that battle would never come. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the fleet, understood what few others in Tokyo dared to admit. The aircraft carrier had replaced the battleship as the true weapon of power. Yet pride, tradition, and years of propaganda bound Japan to its great leviathans. To the Imperial Navy, Yamato was more than a warship. She was the soul of the empire cast in steel. For the first 2 years of the war, Yamato barely moved. She remained anchored at Truk Lagoon, a floating fortress waiting for the decisive battle that Japanese strategy promised would decide the war. Her engines idled, her crew drilled endlessly. She burned precious fuel only to keep boilers from rusting. As the conflict turned, she became a ghost of her own mythology. At Midway, 4 Japanese carriers were destroyed in a single afternoon. At Guadalcanal, Japan's best pilots and ships were bled dry. And through it all, Yamato waited for an enemy that would never approach close enough for her to fight. When she finally went into action at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, her power was awe-inspiring but meaningless. She fired her great guns only once, at aircraft too distant to hit. American pilots called her a dinosaur under a burning sky. Her armor shrugged off 2 bomb hits, proving her strength but also her futility. Because in this new kind of war, strength wasn't measured in inches of steel. It was measured in miles of flight range. By 1945, Japan was cornered. The home islands were being bombed daily. Fuel reserves were nearly gone. And yet the Imperial Navy still dreamed of a glorious final gesture. The plan was Operation 10 Go. Yamato would sail on a one-way voyage to Okinawa, beach herself on the island's shore, and fight as a stationary gun platform until destroyed. No air cover, no return journey. Enough fuel for only one direction. Captain Kosaku Aruga gathered his crew and told them the truth. "We will fight until we are destroyed. Let our deaths have meaning." On April 6, 1945, Yamato left Tokuyama Harbor, accompanied by a single light cruiser and 8 destroyers. As she steamed south through the inland sea, villagers lined the cliffs to watch her pass. Some wept, others bowed. To them, she was not a ship anymore. She was Japan itself, sailing toward its death. That night, 2 American submarines, Threadfin and Hackleback, picked up her silhouette and radioed her position. By dawn, the U.S. Carrier Task Force knew exactly where she was. 386 aircraft, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters launched from the horizon. A storm of metal and fire was on its way. The men aboard Yamato stood ready at their battle stations. They didn't know that the first torpedo to strike her would hit in the exact spot where 30 centimeters of missing steel waited like a trap beneath the waves. April 7th, 1945. The South China Sea is calm, a glassy blue stretching endlessly beneath a thin haze. At 12:32 p.m., the first wave of American aircraft appears, tiny dots on the horizon that grow into hundreds of wings. The men aboard Yamato stare upward, the sun glinting off aluminum, as 386 planes descend from the clouds. Torpedo bombers sweep in low over the waves, dive bombers spiral from the sky, and fighters strafe the decks with machine gun fire. Captain Kosaku Aruga grips the bridge railing and issues the only order that matters. All guns, open fire. The ship erupts. Every cannon, every flak gun, every automatic weapon thunders at once. Tracer fire stitches the air red and white. The ocean boils from near misses. For a few minutes, it seems possible that this mountain of steel might hold. Then, at 12:37 p.m., the first torpedo hits. It strikes the port side near frame 150, directly where the armor belts meet, the invisible seam built on 30 centimeters of missing backing plate. The explosion shudders through the hull like an earthquake. Inside, the pressure wave follows the path Fukuda's engineers designed: rupture, void, oil tank, void, bulkhead, until it reaches the flaw junction. There, instead of dispersing, the stress collides with empty space. The brittle VH armor, perfect against shells but fragile under flexing, snaps. A crack 6 meters long tears open in the seam. Flooding races through 6 compartments at once, bypassing the very defenses meant to contain it. Within 90 seconds, Yamato lists 5 degrees to port. Damage control teams rush through darkening corridors, slamming watertight doors and starting pumps. But this isn't ordinary flooding. The sea is entering where it shouldn't, through fractured armor, through rivet seams that were never supposed to move. At 12:40, another torpedo hits forward. Same side, same junction, same result. More cracks, more water. The list increases to 10 degrees. Aruga orders counter-flooding, a desperate maneuver to pump seawater into starboard compartments to balance the ship. It works for a moment. The ship steadies to 6 degrees. But counter-flooding steals buoyancy, pulling Yamato deeper into the sea. A third torpedo hits at 12:42, then a fourth, then a fifth. Each one strikes the same side, each one drives the fractures deeper, each one exploits the same invisible weakness forged in that dry dock 6 years before. By 12:50, Yamato has been hit 8 times. Flooding spreads faster than damage control can respond. Pumps meant to handle 400 tons an hour face 2,000. Men wade through waist-deep water, hauling hoses, sealing doors, carrying wounded comrades toward the light above. The corridors tilt. Loose shells roll across the deck. At 1:02 p.m., 2 torpedoes hit almost simultaneously. The list jumps to 20 degrees. The ship's massive weight and low center of gravity keep her upright, for now. But the equilibrium is dying. Inside, the command station reports a chilling realization. The damage doesn't match any simulation. The protective system hasn't failed. It's been bypassed. At 1:30, Yamato has taken at least a dozen torpedo hits. Her engines still turn, her guns still fire, but she is dying from within. The port side is gutted, the armored seams shattered like porcelain. American pilots watching from above are stunned. They can't believe she's still moving. One later says, "That ship should have gone down after the first 6 hits. She just kept absorbing punishment." But by 2 p.m., the laws of physics catch up. The list passes 35 degrees, the tipping point from survival to doom. Below decks, trapped air rushes to the high side, accelerating the roll. Yamato turns over, slowly at first, then violently, the ocean swallowing her decks. Men leap into the sea as the horizon tilts and the sky becomes the floor. At 2:02 p.m., she is upside down. For 2 minutes, the inverted hull floats, a steel island painted red beneath the waves. Then comes the final sound, a deep concussive roar as the forward magazine detonates. The explosion is seen from 200 miles away. A mushroom cloud climbs 20,000 feet into the air. When it clears, the sea is empty. 2,498 men are gone. Only 276 survive. The Yamato, built to survive 20 torpedoes, has been destroyed by 19, her armor defeated not by American bombs, but by 30 centimeters of missing steel. When the war ended, the wreck of the Yamato slept in silence, 100 feet below the East China Sea, a broken monument to ambition and error. But in August 1945, Commander Edmund B. Taylor of the U.S. Navy was given one final mission: find out why Japan's unsinkable ship had died so quickly. His team recovered fragments of Yamato's armor from the seabed. What they found stunned the engineers back home. The fractures weren't from torpedo blasts. They followed rivet lines and weld seams, patterns of stress failure, not explosion. To confirm it, the U.S. Navy brought in metallurgists from the Bureau of Ships. Among them was Dr. Robert Palmer, a structural engineer who had studied armor behavior for years. Under a magnifying lens, he found the truth hiding in plain sight. The backing plates behind Yamato's armor belt stopped 30 centimeters short of their intended length. A single decision, invisible once welded shut, had left a seam unsupported. Palmer's calculations told the rest of the story. If the plates had been installed correctly, the stresses from each torpedo blast would have spread evenly across meters of armor, just as Fukuda had intended. But because of that missing support, the force concentrated into a narrow band, enough to fracture even VH steel. The armor meant to protect the ship had, under pressure, destroyed it. Taylor's report to the Navy was blunt. The Yamato was not defeated by weaponry. She was defeated by construction. The Americans were shaken by what they found. Their own shipyards had been working under similar wartime pressure. Speed prioritized over precision, secrecy over documentation. If one of their own battleships carried a hidden flaw like Yamato's, they might never know until it was too late. So they rewrote the rules. Post-war construction standards required every internal plate and weld to be photographed before being sealed. No supervisor could approve a field modification without an engineer's signature. Quality control became gospel. For Japan, the revelation was devastating. When Chief Constructor Kiichiro Fukuda, now an old man, read the American report in 1947, he wrote a letter to the investigators. "I designed the junction to be perfect," he said, "but I did not design for imperfection. That was my failure. I asked steel to behave like faith." The words carried the quiet weight of a man haunted by a question that could never be answered. How many ships had been lost not to the enemy, but to unseen compromises buried beneath paint and pride? Master shipwright Takashi Yamamoto, who had ordered the plates shortened, lived long enough to see the wreck photographed in 1985. He was 88 when he gave his final interview. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I thought 30 centimeters did not matter. I was wrong. The ocean taught me that what you can't see will kill you faster than what you can." The wreck of Yamato still lies at 30°43' north, 128°4' east, her hull torn along the exact lines Palmer predicted. In places where the junction held, her armor remains intact, untouched, perfect, invincible. In others, it's ripped apart like paper. Down there, in the cold dark, lies the truest lesson of the Yamato. That perfection, when built without forgiveness, becomes fragility. That pride can turn to tragedy when it leaves no room for error. And that sometimes in war and in life, the smallest things, a single weld, a missing plate, a human decision, decide the fate of giants.